They shut off my power in the middle of a Montana cold snap, wind howling at 20 below, and they thought I'd just pack up and disappear. That was their first mistake. My name's Cole Mercer. I'm 36, licensed electrician, third generation on a patch of land my grandfather bought back in 1959, 43 acres of scrub pine and frozen dirt just outside Bozeman. I don't live in some glass palace with heated marble floors. I park my fifth wheel on my own property while I finish building my house the slow way. Cash, wiring it myself, no debt, no bank breathing down my neck. Simple. My neighbors? Different story. They live in those modern ranch-style luxury estates with black trim, heated driveways, and garages bigger than my entire trailer. Every winter, their windows glow like magazine covers. And every winter, someone from the Homeowners Association finds a reason to remind me I don't quite fit the brochure. The HOA president, Diane Whitaker, late 50s, perfect hair, drives a pearl white Range Rover. She smiles like she's offering you lemonade while she's measuring your property for violations. Her favorite phrase? Community harmony. January 14th. Wind chill at -18. I wake up because the heater stopped humming. You don't slowly wake up when that happens. You snap awake. It's the kind of cold that doesn't knock politely. It kicks the door in. Inside my trailer, it's 42 degrees and dropping. I throw on boots, step outside, breath turning into smoke, and that's when I see it. My electric meter pulled, tagged, and locked. Big red notice zip-tied to the conduit. Violation of winter aesthetic compliance. Fine, $900. Remove non-conforming dwelling within 14 days. Winter aesthetic compliance. In a blizzard. I call the number. Diane answers on the second ring, calm, composed, like we're discussing garden mulch. Cole, she says, we've received multiple complaints. The trailer disrupts the seasonal uniformity of the neighborhood. Seasonal uniformity. My pipes burst that morning. Cost me $2,400 in damage before noon. Water creeping under cabinets while I'm hauling space heaters from the hardware store just to keep the place above freezing. And here's the thing. This land predates their gated entrance, their stone monument sign, their architectural review committee. My grandfather grazed cattle here when their lots were sagebrush. But the HOA expanded boundary influence a few years back, annexed adjacent parcels through some legal gymnastics, and suddenly I'm under community oversight. That's what they called it. I called it harassment. Now here's where it gets interesting. 2 days later, I'm digging through old property records in my shop, mostly out of spite, and I find a yellowed folder labeled Utility Easement, 1962. Inside, there's a survey map and a handwritten note from my grandfather. Back in the early 60s, before the city extended gas lines out this far, he paid to have a private natural gas pipeline installed from the main junction 2 miles east. 2.7 miles of buried steel line running straight through what is now that entire subdivision. It branches, 47 connections total, 47 houses. Every single furnace in that pristine little community runs on a line installed and owned by my family. There was never a formal transfer. No sale. No recorded utility dedication. Just a handshake agreement and a scribbled note that reads, for neighbors, no charge, no contract, no conveyance, no utility company takeover, just goodwill. I call an attorney buddy of mine, not some billboard guy, an old classmate who actually reads statutes for fun. He digs in, checks county filings, pulls historical easement records. 3 days later, he calls me back. Cole, you're not going to believe this. The pipeline is still deeded under your parcel. There's no municipal adoption. There's no HOA utility agreement. Legally, it's yours, including the master shutoff valve. Where's the valve? I ask. In a concrete vault on your property, near the old well cap. I didn't sleep much that night, because suddenly this wasn't about a trailer anymore. It wasn't about $900 fines or seasonal uniformity. It was leverage. The next morning, I walked out to that concrete vault, brushed snow off the lid, pried it open, and there it was, a rusted but solid industrial gas valve, feeding warmth to every one of those luxury homes. I stood there a long time. I'm not a villain. I don't enjoy watching families suffer. But I also don't enjoy being treated like I'm disposable on land my grandfather cleared by hand. So I did what any electrician with documentation and a chip on his shoulder might do. I turned the valve 90 degrees. Slow. Deliberate. Then I closed the lid. Within 30 minutes, my phone lit up like Christmas. Text from a neighbor. Gas pressure issue? Another. Is your line acting weird? Then Diane. Her voice was tighter now. Cole, we're experiencing a service interruption. Interesting, I said. According to my records, that's a private line. Silence. I spent the afternoon drafting certified letters, 47 of them. Simple terms. Gas service would resume upon execution of a formal utility lease. $380 per month per household, October through March. 15-year term. Reimbursement for $2,400 in damages caused by wrongful power termination. Immediate removal of all RV restrictions and fines. HOA acknowledgement of my land use autonomy. No signature, no heat. Was it aggressive? Sure. But so is shutting off someone's electricity in sub-zero weather over curb appeal. By nightfall, the temperature dropped to -10. Social media in the neighborhood group exploded. People scrambling for propane heaters, booking hotel rooms, dragging kids into SUVs to stay warm. Diane called again around 9 p.m. This is reckless, she snapped. No, I said calmly, staring at the thermostat in my trailer climbing back towards 70 because I'd hooked into my backup generator. Reckless was cutting power in a winter storm. She threatened legal action. I invited it. Because this time, I had paperwork older than her Range Rover. And that's when things really started to unravel. All right, let's pause the drama for a second, because this is where people usually get it twisted. According to standard procedure, an HOA can absolutely enforce aesthetic rules, paint colors, fencing, even what qualifies as a temporary dwelling. That part, pretty normal. When you buy into an HOA, you're agreeing to a private contract. It's not government law, it's civil agreement. Big difference. But here's the catch. HOAs only have authority over what's actually within their recorded covenants and legal control. They cannot seize utilities they don't own. They cannot terminate essential services without due process. And they definitely can't enforce rules outside properly annexed or contracted boundaries without airtight documentation. From a legal perspective, what mattered wasn't emotion, it was paper. Ownership. Recorded easements. Chain of title. If infrastructure was never formally transferred, then goodwill doesn't magically become community property. Now psychologically, this is a classic power hierarchy play. This is a psychological trap. When a board gets used to small wins, small compliance, small fines, they start believing authority equals ownership. They escalate because nobody pushes back. Until someone does. And when leverage flips, panic sets in fast. All right, back to the fallout. By sunrise the next morning it was -12, the kind of cold that makes the air feel brittle, like if you snapped your fingers it might shatter. My phone hadn't stopped vibrating since midnight. Missed calls, texts, voicemails. Half the neighborhood suddenly discovering my contact info after 3 years of pretending I didn't exist. I made coffee slow, deliberate, let it drip. Because here's the thing about leverage. Once you use it, you don't rush. Around 8 a.m., the first real crack showed. A guy named Trevor, software engineer, always jogs with noise-canceling headphones, never waves, knocks on my trailer door. He's wearing a parka over pajama pants, breath fogging hard. Hey man, this gas thing, he says, trying to sound casual. My kids were up all night. Do you know what's going on? I let the silence hang just long enough. Yeah, I said. Private infrastructure dispute. His face shifted. Confusion turning into calculation. You serious? Dead serious. By noon, 3 families had checked into hotels. I saw taillights rolling out of driveways like a slow evacuation. Portable heaters sold out at the hardware store. Someone posted in the HOA group asking if we could temporarily override Cole's valve. Override. Like I was a software glitch. Around 2 p.m., a fire truck rolled into the subdivision. Sirens off, lights just idling. Turns out an elderly couple, the Barrows, tried running a propane heater in their living room with the windows closed. Carbon monoxide alarm went off. Fire department did a welfare check. And here's where Diane's authority started crumbling. The fire captain asked who maintained the gas infrastructure. She said, confidently, the community. He asked for utility permits. She didn't have any. He asked who owned the line. Silence. Because you can't bluff paperwork when someone with a badge is holding a clipboard. By late afternoon, the HOA emergency meeting was packed. Folding chairs, red faces, raised voices echoing off drywall that wasn't heated anymore. I didn't attend. Didn't need to. A neighbor live-streamed part of it. It was chaos. You told us utilities were secured. How are we not covered by insurance? Why are we paying dues if we don't even own the gas line? One board member resigned on the spot. Then another. Diane tried to regain control, kept repeating the phrase, temporary service disruption, like saying it enough would make it true. But here's the reality. Once fear hits family homes, politics disappear. Night fell again, and the forecast dropped lower. -14 by midnight. At 7:30 p.m., Diane called. No greeting this time. What are your terms? She asked. Not angry. Not polished. Just tight. Same ones in the letters, I said. Plus one amendment. Silence. You step down as president. And the bylaws get rewritten to clarify infrastructure ownership. That's extortion. No, I said, steady. It's formalization. She exhaled hard. You're punishing families. I looked around my trailer, at the warped cabinet from the burst pipe, at the invoice sitting on the table. They punished me first. There was a long pause. I could almost hear the calculation happening on her end. Liability exposure, potential lawsuits, the optics if this dragged into a third night. You'll destroy the community, she said quietly. And that's when I realized something. The community wasn't what she was protecting. Control was. By 9 p.m., the revised contract draft went out electronically. I'd had my attorney tighten it up, clear lease language, indemnification clauses, maintenance cost sharing moving forward, annual inspection rights. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was structure. 47 households. Each one had to sign individually. Deadline, 11:59 p.m. Outside, the temperature hit -15. Inside my trailer, my generator hummed steady. 71 degrees. Stable. At 10:12 p.m., the first signed contract hit my inbox. Then another. Then 3 more in a batch. You could almost feel the momentum shift, pride dissolving into practicality. Trevor texted, signed. Please confirm. Confirmed. At 10:47 p.m., Diane emailed hers. No apology. Just a scanned signature and a short line. For the safety of residents. I didn't respond right away. Let it sit for 5 minutes. Because sometimes closure needs weight. At 11:38 p.m., the final household signed. 47 contracts. Certified electronic transfers for my $2,400 reimbursement already pending. Lease payments scheduled monthly through March. Formal acknowledgement that my RV was permitted indefinitely during primary construction. 11:52 p.m. I pulled on boots, grabbed a flashlight, and walked out into the snow. The subdivision was dark in that eerie way heated neighborhoods aren't used to. No furnace exhaust plumes rising, no low hum under the silence. Just wind scraping across rooftops. I reached the concrete vault. Snow had drifted over it again, like the earth trying to hide the lever that mattered most. I brushed it off, lifted the lid. The valve sat there cold and patient. And I'll be honest, I hesitated. Because power like that changes something in you. It's easy to become the villain in your own story if you're not careful. But this wasn't about domination. It was about correction. So I turned the valve back. Slow. Metal groaned softly under pressure shift. And then I waited. At first, nothing. Then, faintly, a distant ignition. One furnace kicking on. Then another. Then another. A chain reaction across frozen lawns. 47 homes pulling heat at once. Within minutes, exhaust plumes rose into the night sky like white flags. I stood there in the cold and watched. Not triumphant. Not angry. Just steady. My phone buzzed. Trevor, heat's back. Thank you. Another message. We're warming up. Then one from Diane. Service restored. Board transition effective immediately. No emoji. No flourish. Just finality. I closed the vault and walked back to my trailer. Inside, I shut off the generator and flipped my own breaker panel back to grid power. Legally restored now that the HOA had reversed their enforcement notice as part of the signed agreement. Funny how fast violations disappear when liability enters the chat. I poured another cup of coffee, even though it was almost midnight. Outside, -15. Inside, 72. And for the first time since that red tag went up on my meter, the air felt even. Not because I won, but because balance had been restored. The next morning the neighborhood looked different. Quieter. No one staring. No one measuring curb appeal. A few subtle nods as I drove past. Respect doesn't always come from popularity. Sometimes it comes from documentation. Diane moved out 6 months later. House sold quietly. New board formed with actual legal counsel involved this time. And every winter since, the gas flows under a signed agreement, inspected, insured, transparent. No more handshake assumptions. No more aesthetic power plays. Just terms. And heat. So what's the lesson here? Because if this was just a revenge story, it'd be shallow. Entertaining, sure, but shallow. The lesson here is leverage without structure eventually turns into abuse, on both sides. Look, HOAs aren't evil by default. They exist because people want predictability. Clean streets. Protected property values. Uniform standards. And honestly, that's fair. When you buy into one, you're signing up for shared rules. But here's where it goes sideways. When small authority goes unchecked long enough, it stops being about order and starts being about identity. Board members stop seeing themselves as volunteers and start seeing themselves as gatekeepers. Every compliance win reinforces the belief that control equals competence. This is a psychological trap. The more someone gets used to people saying, okay, the more shocking it becomes when someone says no. And when that no comes with paperwork, that's when panic replaces confidence. From a legal perspective, the real turning point wasn't when I shut off the valve. It was when documentation entered the conversation. Recorded easements, chain of title, transfer history. Most conflicts like this don't explode because someone's malicious. They explode because assumptions go unchallenged for decades. My grandfather meant well. For neighbors, no charge. That was generosity. But generosity without structure creates dependency. And dependency without clarity creates entitlement. And entitlement? That's gasoline on any small spark of resentment. I could have kept that valve off longer. I could have pushed harder, raised the price, forced more concessions. That's the dark side of leverage. Once you realize you have it, it's tempting to test how far it stretches. But power is a mirror. The second you enjoy someone else's discomfort, you become the thing you were fighting. What changed the outcome wasn't punishment. It was formalization. We moved from handshake to contract, from assumption to clarity, from aesthetic opinions to recorded rights. And something else happened too. The neighborhood shifted. Not dramatically, not like we all started having barbecues together, but the tension eased. Because once rules are written and ownership is defined, everyone can breathe. Even the people who don't like each other. And here's another uncomfortable truth. Part of Diane's reaction? Fear. If she admitted the infrastructure wasn't HOA owned, that meant the board had been operating under a flawed assumption for years. That threatens reputation, authority, ego. When identity is tied to leadership, admitting error feels like self-destruction. So she doubled down. Most escalation isn't about money. It's about pride. If you're in an HOA or thinking about buying into one, here's my advice as a guy who learned it the hard way. Read everything, not just the glossy summary. Dig into recorded documents. Understand what's actually owned versus what's assumed. Know where infrastructure starts and stops. Ask boring questions. Boring questions prevent dramatic winters. And if you're ever on a board, remember you're a steward, not a ruler. Authority in a community is rented, not owned. The second it becomes personal, you've already lost perspective. Would I handle it the same way again? Honestly, I'd still turn the valve. But I'd probably call for a meeting before it hit -15. Because the goal isn't to freeze people out. It's to stop being treated like you don't belong on land your family bled for. Outside my trailer that night, it was cold enough to crack stone. Inside, it was steady. And that's really what this whole thing was about. Stability, clarity, boundaries. So now I'm curious. What would you have done? If someone weaponized rules against you, would you fight back the same way? Would you negotiate first? Or would you let it slide for the sake of peace? And if you're on the other side of that fence, sitting on a board somewhere, how do you make sure authority doesn't quietly turn into overreach? Drop your thoughts below. I read more of them than you think. Because at the end of the day, communities don't fail because of cold weather. They fail because nobody checks the valve until it's too late.